Good evening, YouTubers. Tonight, I would like to talk about a kind of a trend I see, not just in Latin America, but all over the world, from North America to Europe to Southeast Asia. Now, I can't speak of the whole world, but from people I know in various places, like from Thailand to Mexico to Guatemala, Colombia. I'm trying to think of all different places, but I kind of hang out in Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and kind of go back and, I used to go back and forth a lot more before coronavirus, traveling kind of my little circle. But as I was coming through Mexico, I've noticed a lot more YouTubers talking about the rising inflation, and not just like small rises, but like 50% increases in a lot of stuff. And previously you could say, and you can still say, that it can be related to the production chain across the world being broken. So because our production chain stopped during coronavirus, lots of cheap stuff from China didn't come to the New World or go to Europe or wherever it went, China being the manufacturer of the world. So I can see that. But even just tonight, I saw kind of a new YouTuber to me, but he's been around a long time. He's one of the better YouTubers, in my view, telling you how it is and how to do things really. He has a lot of my same views, like you can use a SA Corporation to accomplish a lot of your goals. You can use an LLC in the United States and whatever they call that in Canada or the UK. You can also, too, in Asia, use a lot of those same entities to create employment contracts, to gain residency, etc., etc., etc. Now, that in his case, that's what he's talking about. But as he talks about in his videos, it's not as expensive as you might think. And if you have a middle income or middle class income, it's cheap enough. You can set up an entity in, like, say, Thailand, I don't get into it, but create an employment contract through your company, get the visa, party on, do whatever you want to do. Anyways, he was just pointing out how the cost of living is starting to increase in Thailand. Another set of bloggers I follow in Mexico, I can't recall their name, so I tell you, it's not like I'm trying to keep it secret. I just can't remember right now. They're a younger couple, and they've been noticing the rise in prices, like going out to eat, transportation. Now, again, a lot of this can be related to coronavirus, but as coronavirus fades into the whatever future we're going into, I don't see prices coming down. I personally see them going up. The same thing in the United States. Now, some of the places I visit when I'm in the United States are maybe unique, like bigger cities. So I understand that some people will say that's a little different than small towns, and that's true. I, in the past, have lived in really small communities where I'm about to say something that most viewers probably won't believe, but you can get a rent in the past. You could get rents in these little teeny tiny towns in the United States for under 200, under 300, under 400, under 500, everything included. But the downside is, who wants to live in small town America? There's not a lot of entertainment, not a lot to do, but if you like a small town atmosphere, it's very, very affordable, and you can live in these places, cash up, continue on your travels or whatever. That's what I have done in the past sometimes. But also, too, I just like living in small communities. Growing up, I grew up in bigger cities, and as things kind of break down, especially nowadays, I don't prefer them as much. But for jobs, like, for example, in Phoenix, I would basically say anyone of any age group, even if you're an older person from 18, 19 to 50 or even 60, You can roll up into Phoenix. It's expensive though. You can get an apartment for $800 to $1,000, and believe me, when I say 800 or let's say $800 to $1,200 a month, you're not going to be living in a nice. You're not going to necessarily be in the ghetto, but you're not going to be in a high yuppie area. You're not going to be like that. $800 to $1,200 is not going to be buying you a luxurious place. In some places, that $100 can be in the ghetto. Not always, but it can be. So just to add some perspective. But anyways, in a big city, you can roll up, get a job, even during this coronavirus recession. Now, I haven't worked a long time, but you can get a job just for what it's worth. Anyways, the point of this video is I see these big trends, and the rising inflation is one of the bigger ones, and possibly higher taxes in some parts of the world. I'm a little bit ambiguous. Now, I don't really think in the United States taxes are going to go up super high, but I respect other viewers think that's the case. It's just, in the U.S., if you raise taxes too much, like in California or New York, people just go to Florida. If you raise taxes too much in Florida, people just go to Puerto Rico. If the viewers don't know, if you're a U.S. citizen, you can go to Puerto Rico, and after 1 year's residence, if you have capital gains before 1 year's up, I think they tax you at 10% on those gains. If after 1 year, it's zero. There's no income tax. I believe after 1 year, there might be 1 to 2 or 3 year grace period. I can't remember exactly how it works. But for capital gains, I think it's after 1 year, it's zero. And then for income taxes, I think it's zero right away, but you might need to be resident for a year. I'm not an accountant or a tax accountant. But again, that's if you're an American citizen, and that's if you want to stay in the U.S. sphere of influence. And Puerto Rico, it's one of the cheaper places in the Caribbean, but not the cheapest. They use $1, and it's kind of expensive. If you go on Airbnb, you'll see rents up to $3,000, and then you'll see some cheaper $300, $400, $500 rent. And I'm reluctant to say the ghetto, but places where you're going to need a car. If you're not used to like a Latin American crime and how it works, and how you might not realize you're in the ghetto, but you probably are. And it's a little bit more, you need to be more aware if you're going to live in these areas. Personally, I think, this is going to sound crazy, but parts of Central America are way safer than ghettos in Puerto Rico, but that's my opinion. Feel free to disagree, but it depends on your outlook. Now, Puerto Ricans think the Dominican Republic is super, super, super dangerous, and I'm not claiming the Dominican Republic is not dangerous. I'm just saying, even in the U.S., or pardon me, even in Puerto Rico, which is part of the U.S., things can be, in my opinion, a little kind of like Baltimore. Well, that's one trend I see is rising prices now with all this money printing and all over the world, from the EU to North America to Latin America to Asia. I just see all these YouTube influencers and a lot of the people I follow, they're all seeing the same things I'm seeing. Now, for what it's worth, in the U.S. or in Central America and Guatemala, you can still get food relatively cheaper than the U.S., although it's going up, but it's still much cheaper than the U.S. So that difference is still there. So you'll still save a lot. Well, you can save a considerable amount of money if you live here, if that's one of your goals. One of the biggest values, in my opinion, of living in Central America or parts of South America is you can regain your privacy. You can live a low-profile life. You don't really need ID for anything except for banking and crossing a border, basically. And even then, you can do some workarounds there if you want. How much longer these things will last, I don't know. With AI technology and other things, these things will get more difficult. But it'll be like a cat and mouse game between you and whatever authorities you're worried about. Like, there's no government in Central America that's anything close to like the U.S. government or the EU. They just cannot track your assets, your banking, in a very efficient way, like in real time. They just can't. they're not even there yet. I don't think they'll ever be there, but it could be they'll be there in 5, 10, 20, 30 years. I don't know. Right now in Central Market, they're just getting to the point of putting in, all the computer, like all the real estate assets that are listed in a computer that you can track and follow and find out if you're in the government. I mean, not the average person, but it's getting to the point where you'll be able to go to your lawyer. You can track down who owns what. I mean, on paper, who knows who really owns it, but if you don't know down here, you can own assets in an S.A. corporation, just like in the States, you can own assets in an LLC, and it may list the officers and stuff, but that's not necessarily who owns everything, or at least not always. And sometimes people will write me privately and say, well, blah, 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 and I'll point out, well, look, not even people like Hillary Clinton or people like famous actors and actresses, they have a lot of their assets that are not really in their names, not their real names, not their stage names, but corporate names, lawyers' names, accountants' names. That's what I'm getting at. And if you think that's illegal, it's only legal to do these things if your intention is to defraud people, because the United States is a common law country where you can call yourself whatever you want as long as you're not defrauding people. Anyways, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an accountant. So run this by your lawyer accountant. But realize when you do, many lawyers are deal killers. Anyways, getting back to the video, one of the biggest trends now that's kind of in its early development is rising inflation all over the world. And in the past, it would have been easy to jump into various foreign currencies, and you still can. But right now, the dollar's weak, the euro's strong, the pound's strong. But at any time, those could reverse. There's no real long-term currency, maybe the Swiss franc, but not even the Swiss franc or the Japanese yen, to me, are really the greatest places to put your money. Maybe Singapore dollars is the only real modern day currency that I would really trust for a long period of time. So really, you can own Singapore dollars. You can trade in and out of the dollar, the pound, the yen, and you can of course own gold. The biggest asset I would own is gold and a bit of Bitcoin personally. But in the old days, you would just jump into different foreign currencies to keep ahead of inflation. And in the good old days, you could buy these foreign currency bonds that paid you 5, 6, 7, 8% interest. Now you can't do that anymore. That's why I'm mentioning all this. The trend is more inflation, but there's really nowhere, I hate to say safe, but where there's not a lot of volatility in the asset you're going to buy to protect yourself from this rising inflation. Bitcoin is really volatile. Gold can be volatile. Silver can be more volatile than gold. Stock markets can melt down in a New York second. You could buy REITs in Singapore or Hong Kong or Australia or Canada, but you need to do your homework research before you do it. But even those kind of assets, if interest rates keep going up like they are, those kinds of assets can be knocked down 50% pretty fast. So that's one big trend I see right now that's kind of starting is the beginning of inflation all over the world, like the 70s, I think. The other trend that my viewers should be familiar with is now I don't know if we're at the end, but if you have any kind of financial privacy in a first world country, that's coming to an end pretty soon, if not already. If you live in the EU, you live in the UK, Australia, New Zealand, you've probably noticed by now, you're tracked everywhere you go by your electronic devices. You're tracked by your ID and the chips in them and in your passport. You're tracked in ways you're probably not even aware of. And now you need ID to do almost anything. Rent an apartment, go to the doctor. Even in the US, you didn't used to need an ID to go to the hospital or a clinic, but now you need to show ID to go to a hospital or clinic, among many, many other things. So you need, if you're in North America or United States and Canada, you generally need your ID to do anything, and you need your social insurance number, your social security number. They track you that way. Like just renting an apartment, getting a job, you need all those things. The only workaround is to work for yourself through an LLC that you have your lawyer set up, or whoever, your nominee. 2 or 3, have part of the Asperg show your name, all that kind of stuff, and then have other LLCs maybe you do other things with. There's different strategies in how you kind of work those things out. But that's the only way now, if you want to get back even just a little bit of your privacy, is to work for yourself through an LLC where you can just work as an employee where you don't have to show any ID or anything. At least in the US, You get a tax ID, and your lawyer can get a tax ID number for any of your companies, or a nominee can, and set up those bank accounts on your behalf. However you want to handle that. But just to get on an airplane now in the United States, it used to be you just had to use a regular license. Now you have to use a special, I forget what they're called, but it's a special license now that all states have to have. That's kind of like a national ID instead of a state ID. Or you're not going to get on the plane, or you have to use a passport or a passport card. Most first world countries are like that. You have to use it. You have to have an ID. You're going to soon probably have to have your vaccine card. Not just that, but a whole thing that's going to track you when and how you're vaccinated and all that. And all this stuff tracks you around the world. In case the viewers don't know, when you use your ATM card or credit card, they're tracking your spending all over the world no matter where you go. Unless you break that chain with cash or some kind of offshore deal that you use. And even an offshore bank account in your name isn't really as private as it used to be. It can be useful and helpful, though I won't say otherwise, but there's still uses for an offshore account in your own name. But you can only really break that chain with cash, gold coins to a certain extent, and nominee banking. I'll just say that. That's really the only way you can do it. You really don't get too much privacy in Bitcoin unless you set everything up the right way. And I would say that privacy is going to be kind of limited. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. The biggest benefit of Bitcoin, you can transfer your wealth from one country to another without having to do a bank wire, without having to get permission from Uncle Sam or whatever country you're from. So there's rising inflation now, hardly any privacy. And then another trend I see is there's going to be a lot more unemployment. The only way you're going to stay affluent or keep your head above water is to work for yourself. I just see AI and a lot of other technologies taking over, that if you don't have a real skill that's valuable, you're not going to make that much if you work at a job, and you're going to be at the mercy of whatever government rules and regulations of whatever jurisdiction you're in, with withholding tax, all that kind of thing. So that's another trend that it's kind of what I'd call a new serfdom. So those are kind of some of the big trends I've been thinking about a lot lately. I do think as we go into the future, there will be solutions as far as living in different parts of the world, and as far as getting income in a private way or creating wealth in a private way. I don't think those have necessarily been created yet by entrepreneurs and business people yet. I think we're kind of like stabbing in the dark a little bit, but I'm more hopeful in that there's going to be communities arising all over the world where you can trade your labor and your skills and live in communities and prosper and make money and save it in ways that's going to be off the radar of the local bad guys and local governments and things like that. But between now and there, I mean, from getting from here to there, it's going to be chaotic. So that's what I got for you as far as tonight. I'm just amazed at all the videos coming out now about rising inflation all over the world. And I attribute some of that to the breakdown in the production chain coming out of China and all the bottlenecks it's created and all the rebuilding of infrastructure around the world to not be so reliant on China. But I think a lot of this beginning inflation is just starting from all the money printing that we had about a year ago when we went into Corona, from the EU to the US to Australia to Canada and many, many countries. So I would expect this rising inflation to keep going. We'll see what happens when we print like a 3% number in the US or 4% or 5%, depending on what part of the world you live in. Some governments, I expect, will try to push back that inflation by rising interest rates, but most we'll see if they raise rates or not. At the beginning, I don't think they will, so inflation could potentially go overshoot more than what the government really wants. But some countries are going to let this thing overshoot a lot, and I don't know. I can't predict which countries are going to be, but I can only think that if you're diversified in a few different currencies, you own some gold, you own some Bitcoin, It's about the only way you're going to be able to keep ahead of this inflation and possibly buy or rent real estate at much lower prices as these things unfold. But not everyone really wants to own real estate, so I can understand that. But anyways, the trouble with real estate is if you're in the first world in North America, real estate taxes are going to be rising. So that's the trouble with real estate. In Latin America, taxes are pretty low here on real estate, so I don't see that really escalating that much, but we'll have to wait and see. It depends on what country. And like if you're in Argentina, of course, they will do every stupid thing that's really uneconomic and raise taxes when they should be lowering them. So again, if you're in like Argentina, expect them to do the wrong thing at the wrong time. Other countries I don't think will do that. We'll have to wait and see. So anyways, I'm going to upload this, wait for the comments. Like, share, leave a comment, and tell me what you think as far as this rising inflation where you're at. I'm starting to see it in the Mexico, Guatemala region. Soon I'll be trying to get to some other places to see how things are there, but I think we're in the early innings of this escalating inflation. All right, good night.